This fucking workshop is 16 minutes long. I'm so sorry. Who let me sit in front of a fucking microphone? Hey, hi, hello, my name is Kate Harkin. I am a Brock Improv alumni. I'm going to be talking to you guys about some easy ways to start establishing things inside of your narrative so that you can just get rolling with the scene without having to put too much thought into it and just get it right out of the way. With any story, you want to be hitting your beginning, your middle, and your end points in a story. Your beginning starting to establish things, your middle usually being a rising action, or the lead up to the rising action. And then the end being the conclusion and resolving the conflict that has developed over the time of the scene. But it's really hard to get to the middle point without knowing how to start off the beginning. So I'm going to really be focusing on starting off the beginning and letting you know a few ways to get things rolling early so that you don't spend over half of your scene time as the beginning. In order to understand a story, you're going to want your settings as well as your characters. And these are your two most important things in order to start building your story off of. Because without one of those things, there's always going to be something that feels like it's missing. So you want to establish those two things. Now, a problem that a lot of people have is trying to rush in to establishing those two things. And that ends up with big information dumps that I like to call the exposition fairy. I didn't coin that term, and I don't even know if that's exactly the way that whoever did coin it exactly meant it, but the way that I explain an exposition fairy is when you go in and you just start explaining a little bit too much in one or two sentences just to get everything out of the way. So for example, wow, the restaurant business is really rough, huh, Chef Brian? I can't believe that I have to make 200 salads in an hour. Okay, great. You have established a lot of things very quickly. And that's not always a bad thing. That can be comedic. But you don't want to be using that every single time. And it also creates a little bit of a problem in that I would argue would be considered a little bit of steamrolling because you aren't allowing your scene mates the opportunity to establish any of those billion things that you just decided to say, this is what's happening. So to suddenly explain away all of these things without even letting your scene mates have the chance to participate just kind of says that you are taking over, and you don't want that because improv should be collaborative. You want to make sure that the things that you're doing with your scene mates. It's what you guys are building together. Now, of course, you should always walk onto the stage in improv expecting one of your ideas at least to not actually make it into the scene, because sometimes other people just jump in before you and you don't get the chance to introduce what you wanted to, and that's okay. What's less okay though is having somebody just decide that they're going to take everything into their own hands and none of your ideas is going to be allowed in. This is all debatable. There's always if, ands, and buts into the rules of improv. There's always ways to be bending these, but I think it's important to understand a few things on the why maybe you don't want to be doing these things before you go and just say, this is the right way, because there's so many different ways in improv. Now, another problem with this example that I gave is that it's just unnatural, which has its place in improv at times, and that can be okay. But if you're going for something where you want to make your scene feel a little bit more natural, then you want to make sure that the way that your characters are behaving are also natural. And these kind of big info dumps aren't exactly things that a lot of people do in everyday life. Especially if you are interested in making your scene a serious scene, avoid that kind of bleh. Okay, so I've told you what not to do. And that's not very helpful unless I also give you some things of what you should be doing. Or should be trying, at least. The first thing I recommend that you do is tasking, which if you don't know what that is, Olivia has done a workshop on tasking already. So go watch that and she will explain all of the little details of tasking to you. Now, of course, tasking is something that's a lot easier to do in-person improv, and who knows how much longer we're going to be stuck on online improv, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible. There's still some things that you can do in the constraints of your camera, and that little bit of physicality, if you can get it in there, is excellent to try and do. I know that it can be very difficult to try and remember that because we have this extra, like, inconsistency of reality by being behind a screen while we're trying to do this. So having that on top of also essentially just being a bunch of people playing pretend, it can be very hard to remember. That said, do try and be as physical as you can. It can add a lot to your characters. And that alone is a wordless way to start building your setting. The actions that your characters are doing will tell people what you are doing and probably where. For example, if you're washing dishes, you're probably at work somewhere or you are at home. And the character dialogue can tell us more about which of those two settings washing dishes might be in. So definitely be tasking as much as you can, because that really will help, even in the smallest ways, to build and such. The second thing that I encourage you to do is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to establish a handful of things into your narrative quickly. And that is by asking specific questions. By a specific question, I mean something that requires your character to have prior knowledge about your other character in the scene. So, for example, you could ask a question like, is your brother doing better? So this kind of question establishes multiple things right off the bat. One, it establishes a prior relationship with the other character that is in the scene with you. It establishes a problem that is in the other character's life. It also establishes a third character that another scene mate of yours who might not be in the scene yet but is on the back line could assume, which would be the brother. And the fourth and last thing, it is an offer to your scene mate to naturally build onto their own character, onto a problem, and also possibly start to help establish exactly who you are to them. A lot of people don't like talking about things that are happening in their days or their lives without just being prompted to first. It's a nice little way to start your scene off that will get your scene mate talking. And the more you're able to ask these kinds of questions, the more you'll learn not just about your own character, but also about the other character in the scene with you, and also the world that they are living in. And the audience will get to see this as well. So we can assume from the question, is your brother doing better, that your character is closely enough acquainted with this other character that they are trusted enough to know that their brother is not doing well. And that you know that they have a brother, and that it's okay for you to be asking this question. It's not just something that, your character shouldn't be asking. And if it is, we'll see that in the other character's response. And even if they don't want to respond, if that character shows you shouldn't be asking me that, then that's a whole other route that your character could take that we can immediately learn from of, well, that was across the line. You shouldn't have asked that. Great. That's more that we know about your character. They shouldn't have asked that. So those kinds of questions, they'll bring up a lot more that you didn't even know about your character. And they aren't bad to even start a scene off with, so long as you've been doing a little bit of tasking first. And that way you immediately have established a possible conflict, a conflict that you can lie back onto, and you've got your characters rolling right out of the gate. Now, if you want to have a character that isn't as closely acquainted with the other character, because in that example, we have somebody that really knows the fact that they have a brother and that they're sick or not doing well in some way or another. So let's go for an example that you don't actually need to know much about the other character at all. You could ask a question like, hey, did you remember to fix the valve this time? That kind of question has now established that we're probably coworkers, maybe coworker and client. It doesn't mean that we really know each other that well, but the addition of the phrase "this time" is what makes that a specific question. It's not, did you remember to fix the valve? Because you could ask that to anybody. But did you remember to fix the valve this time implies that your character probably forgot that in the past. They have a history of making a mistake where they probably did not remember to fix the valve. And again, right out of the gate, we have some form of relationship that we can delve into a little bit deeper pretty quickly based off of the response that your scene mate gives you. And it also gives you the conflict of, well, we don't know how competent that your character or that your scene mate's character might be if they tend to not remember to fix the valve. And it gives you a place where you can raise the stakes as well. Unlike the last question of, is your brother doing better? This question is less personal to the other character, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to know them super well. So if you don't want that, like, super close connection with your scene mate's character, something that you can possibly grow and build into co-worker to friendship relationship, or make that a worse relationship of co-worker who wants to leave, you have that opportunity. The magical thing about using these kinds of questions to start off your scene, or at least when you get to use them early, is that every question that you ask like this, every specific question, is an offer. It engages both you and your scene mate because your question is directly interacting with them, and it encourages them to respond and get a chance to interact with you without making things too difficult. Sometimes we have a hard time knowing how to start a conversation with another person. So especially when you start a conversation with a "hi, what's your name?" it's hard to get out of that awkward spot of the meet and greet for the first time. So by asking these specific questions and allowing your characters to quickly establish that they do know each other already, you get to skip that first awkward step of, I don't know what to say to this person because I don't know this person or how they'll react. And that can be a character in themselves, but if you're trying to get these things stepped up early on, then these kinds of specific questions can just start getting the ball rolling, and it can start putting ideas into everybody's heads of, oh, what if they also knew this person? So if you can start with these specific questions, you'll be surprised at how much you feel like you know more about your characters, all of the characters on stage. And something that is key about asking specific questions is, even if these are yes or no questions, and both of the examples that I used were yes or no questions, they don't need big, long-winded answers. The response that your scene mate is going to give you will still tell you a lot about their relationship. You will learn so much based off of the reaction that they give you along with their yes or no. And if they expand, that's great. We're going to get to learn so much more. So look for opportunities to also ask follow-up questions. There's just so much that you can play with this. So I really recommend trying it out in your scenes and seeing what you can do and how much more you'll find out just by asking these questions. I'm also going to clarify, a specific question is not a question like, what kind of dog is that? Asking a question like, what kind of dog is that, is not a specific question, because any random person on the street can come ask you, hey, what kind of dog is that? It doesn't establish anything aside from, they have a dog. We're going to learn what kind of dog it is. So that's why you want to ask something that is specific, something that requires your character to already have information about. And it's possible that we'll learn about how you got that information as the scene goes on. There's so many more questions that you can try and learn and discover about a scene from a specific question than from a non-specific question. So I really hope that this made sense. It's just a small little thing that I like to bring into my scenes personally that I think is very useful. I used to do a few exercises focusing around using questions when I coached the competitive team, and I found that it worked pretty well for us. So if that's something that you would like to try for yourself in some scenes, I really do recommend it. Even if it doesn't work out for you, who knows? Just try it. If you have any questions, you are super free to message me on Discord. I am in the Brock Improv Discord server. If you don't have questions, then you don't have to message me. I think I have accomplished my task of telling you about some improv things. Go out there and, improvise, I guess.